And we're live.
Brilliant. Okay, kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to our hearing this morning. We'll just, if we can, commence the day with our karakia, and then we'll go into some introductions. So the karakia that the Commission uses, I will say on our behalf. Whakataka tahau ki te uru, whakataka tahau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kia uta, kia mā tarata kia tai. Kia hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hehu, tihei Māori ora. So good morning all. We'll just commence with some introductions, and the easiest way to do that is to ask fellow commissioners to introduce themselves. So we'll do that first, and we'll call on the North Island end of the contingent, excuse the cat, Commissioner Piper.
That was tuppence, the one-fanged wonder. Kia ora, it costs $600 to get a broken tooth out, by the by. I'm Sue Piper, am a member of the Commission, clearly, and I've been in and around local government for quite a long time. Cheers.
30 years, I think, is the number.
Thereabouts.
Commissioner Anea.
Hi everybody, great to be with you today. Most of you know me, I'm Janie Anea. I've been lucky enough to be on the Commission for 7 years, 18 years in local government, 9 as Mayor of the Timaru District. Thank you.
Cheers, Janie. And I'm Brendan Duffy, former Mayor of the Horowhenua, at a time when David was the CEO. Bit of time in, so 21 years in local government, bit of National Council stuff, and privileged to be the chair of the Commission. Also, you'll see on the screen just 2 members from the Commission office today. We haven't, our third member is ill, regretfully. So you should find there EJ Ruthven, our senior advisor, and Penny Langley, our CEO. So those are the introductions from our side, but just before we pass through to you, Mayor Sam, for your introductions, I just want to acknowledge the mana whenua of the rohi that we are considering today. We acknowledge the iwi and hapu of this land. We especially acknowledge Te Tau Mutu Runanga and Tinai Tuahuriri Runanga, who are important relationships. They are important relationships for you in your rohi. We also acknowledge that we are carrying out this in a virtual setting. To tell you that creates various layers of stress and distress as we get ourselves established. And you've seen today elements of that. But look, it's the only appropriate way under the circumstances. And I just want to acknowledge and the appreciation of the Commission for the background work that goes into getting this established. I'm out of town today in a completely different part of the country, using different people to help set up, and it's certainly working. So just want to make that acknowledgement. Pass through to you, Mayor Sam.
Kia ora, Brendan. And do you want me to just introduce the group, or is this handing to me to give our submission?
Introduce your team, and then we'll go on to the submission.
Great. Oh, kia ora koutou. I'm Sam Broughton, ko Koromatua o Waikirikiri, the Mayor of Selwyn District. I've been the Mayor for coming up 6 years, and I was on council 6 years before that. Liz is my wife, a great massage therapist, and I've got a wee daughter, Elliot, who turns 5 on Saturday. So she's counting down the days for that, and was super excited this morning that there was no more weekends until her birthday. That's me, and I'll hand over to David, Malcolm, and Stephen, and today's to introduce themselves.
Kia ora koutou, good morning everybody. I'm David Ward. I'm Chief Executive here at Selwyn District Council. Like Commissioner Piper, I've also clocked over the 30-year mark in local government, starting in 1991. In the last 14 of those years, I have been in Chief Executive roles. Malcolm.
Yeah, kia ora tātou, Malcolm Lyle. I'm
Deputy Mayor here in Selwyn. I've been Deputy Mayor for the last 2 terms. I too have been in local government for around 20 years, so have seen a few changes. Cheers.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Stephen Hill. I'm Group Manager Communication and Customers at Selwyn District Council, and also Deputy Electoral Officer for Selwyn. If we're playing the numbers game, I think I've been in local government for most of the last 25 years as well at a number of different councils in both North and South Islands.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Therese and I'm admin support at SDC.
Okay, so Sam, Mayor Sam, the process is pretty simple. You'll give us a summary, an overview of your submission that we've already received, obviously a decision that you've already made. There'll be some questions, there may be some questions from commissioners at the end of that process. We'll then hear from the applicant. We might, during that process, have questions that we forward back to you to respond to in your right of reply, and then we'll bail out from there and go away and make our decisions. So that's essentially the process that we'll go through. So look, we're in your hands. The floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you for the introductions, and nice to see you all. Ngā mihi to the Commission, Penny, Janie and Brendan, thank you for your time to listen to us, and EJ, Sue, the work that, sorry, Penny and EJ, the work that goes on to make this happen, and Sue for listening into, I guess this happens all over the country all the time, but for us this is, or for me, this is the first time presenting to the Commission, and so nice to be able to do that. Shame it can't be in person, and as has already been said, we'll get through today virtually. For Selwyn District Council, this has been a long and considered process around making sure that we have great representation for our community heading into the elections later this year. It had been 6 years since we had been through the last representation review, and so the council determined that we would set up a subcommittee to run through a process to determine what that future shape should look like. One thing was very clear is the fastest growing district in the council, and with growth unevenly spread right across our district, the status quo was not an option. And many of our wards were exceeding or destined to exceed the plus or minus 10% rule, and some were well above 20% as we embarked on this process. So definitely needing to think about a future shape, particularly around ward structure. But we considered number of councillors, who the communities of interest that we were representing look like, and people's ties to Selwyn or to their ward or to their township, and wanted to understand the mood and feeling in the community for where we were heading. The subcommittee was made up of a member from every ward, existing ward in Selwyn. It included the community board chair, and it included myself as an ex officio member onto the subcommittee of council, and was chaired by Councillor Mark Alexander. Mark was the chair of the previous representation review as well, and put his hand up to continue in to pick up the role again this term as we went through it. One of the first things that was a major point of discussion was around Maori wards. It was raised early, and it was raised a couple of times through the whole process. You'll be familiar with that with all the rest of your work that's going on. But so at the very beginning, Maori wards was discussed. We talked to our local rūnanga, Ngāitu Hereri and Taumotu, and both did not want to see Maori wards present in Selwyn District Council. And actually there's been a Ngāi Tahu stance across Canterbury. They're much more interested in the mana whenua voice and what the conversations are and relationships look like with councils, rather than elections for Māori onto our council. And the discussion also looked at the number of Māori within Selwyn and where that would need to be at to consider a change. We took the advice of our mana whenua partners and did not promote a Maori ward for Selwyn. But then halfway through the process, the law, there's the law change, and Minister Mahuta champions some improvements around elections for Māori, and that again raised the discussion for us and was reconfirmed by local rūnanga that they were pleased to see no Maori ward for Selwyn district going forward. We also wanted to learn from others and realised that it had been 6 years since we'd been through the process. So we had a couple of Zooms at the time because, again, we were COVID had hit by this stage. So Napier and Ashburton, we held 2 Zoom calls with them, the representation review members and the mayors in those places, to understand what process they'd been through, any changes that they'd made. Ashburton had dropped a couple of members and talked through how well that had gone for them post-election and having a slightly smaller council than where they'd been before. And Napier was also good to talk and get I guess a different context. It's easy to get in your own bubble and think through what your own experience has been, but to hear from others was really important. And then we did some pre-consultation with our community that wasn't about options. It was just about trying to identify how people in our community identify themselves. That came back with some really interesting pieces. The strength of knowing that you live in Selwyn isn't a particularly strong thing that gathers people together. But knowing what town you're from and the ownership you have of your particular town is really strong. People care whether they're from Dunsandel or Darfield or Ralston or Lincoln or Taitapu or Springfield. Your town matters. Selwyn District Council, as the mayor, this hurts, because we need to do a better job at ownership of our district. But the same for our ward structure. The ward and the district aren't held as tightly as the township that you're from, and so that was really the key identifier there. Another key thing that came back was that local representation is really important. People were really keen to see someone from their area on council, not just because we toyed and thought through elections at large, but no, they came back. There, people actually want to know there's someone from their area that was going to be on council. And also, one of the other key feedbacks was there was no strong desire for change. No one was kicking up a storm. There wasn't lots of people coming and telling us that the current system was broken and it was wrong. The reason for change was the legislation and the plus or minus 10%, and we were the ones driving the conversation around things need to change. That wasn't coming from our community. We then got into some more detailed pieces and started looking at maps and things. So there were 19 different maps, I think, that had been created, and then another edition would come out because someone would want to see if the boundary went down a different road or around a different block, and then a new map ended up being created. And I think the subcommittee met about 13 times over 12 months, so gave a lot of consideration to different options and thought through each nuanced change, got full consideration. And the committee themselves was well supported by Stephen, who's on the call, our CE David, who's here, and our staff to ensure that we weren't just guessing things. We actually had the maps in front of us as we were discussing what was going on. I mentioned the growth of the district at the beginning, but so Selwyn is 73,000 people live in our district. It's the 3rd largest district in the South Island population-wise. Christchurch, then Dunedin, then Selwyn. And Ralston is 20,000 or just over 20,000 of those 73,000 people. So there's many people that, and I was guilty of this too, who think of ourselves as kind of small and think about, very rural and very, out of the city, but actually, there's a really large population we're serving, and with 20,000 people in our largest town, but only a few hundred people in some of our smaller towns, the way that representation needs to happen matters, and making sure that the small towns are represented is one thing, but also recognising that those 20,000 people need their own strong representation is another. And the transition from a rural space into a rural and urban space means that the way we've thought through what our representation needs to be has had that sort of nuance across it. And our private plan changes, we've currently had, I think, 18 private plan changes for over 10,000 new sections given to us in the last 12, it'll be 16 months now. And so those also became part of the discussion, because should the areas that are being considered for private plan changes, if we're going to create a larger urban area around Rolleston, should it be large enough to include the private plan changes, or does it just include, which is another 3,000 or 4,000 people, or should it just include those that live here now and the boundaries that we currently have around residential areas? and we determined that it should just be around the existing spaces because we didn't want to preempt decisions through the Resource Management Act around where people may or may not live in the next 12 months to 10 years as those private plan changes move their way through the system. So yeah, that was another sort of key part of the discussion, is how future-proof should we try and make this? Are we trying to land a plan that is fit for today? Or are we trying to land a plan that's going to be good and not need any change in 3, 6, 9, 12 years? And because of the rapid change and the uncertainty, I guess, that COVID had over us, but also not knowing where the private plan changes themselves were going to be, we went with the certainty rather than creating more uncertainty if we were going to guess where the future might take us around those private plan changes. So the key things that were considered were communities of interest, our plus or minus 10% rule, which had obviously been broken. And we also considered that we wanted a lower number of councillors. We weren't looking for options that had 15 or 20 councillors. We've currently got 11 in the mayor, 12 elected members, and we were looking at options that were from there down rather than including those that were up. The process, I'll get Stephen and David to talk through some particulars on that, but the feeling amongst the subcommittee as we got towards the end were there are 4 key maps, and they were put out to our community for pre-consultation to kind of get a soft feeling for how the community was on them. And the feedback, I would say, was very underwhelming. And that we made ourselves very available, turned up to all of the local libraries and the local wards. Were there for, I think, 3 hours each time, that covered during the afternoon through to early evening, so that people that needed to cook dinner for families could come after school, and those that had work could come after work. And there was probably 3 or 4 of us at each one of those, and we probably spoke to was 6 the most we had, Stephen. 1 might have been the fewest at each one. So a very low level of engagement from our community, as well as lots of things on Facebook, direct communications to community committees in each of the townships, and the Melbourne Community Board themselves running some pieces. So we wanted that pre-consultations to understand, are we heading in the right direction before we do the formal stuff? And is there some extra information that we've missed that you would like to give us? So you will have seen the 4 maps, and they're all got similar colours on them to show where we are. But 1 and 2 seem to be the ones that have come up for the most discussion. 3 and 4 ended up, 4 particularly. 4 because it was keeping the boundaries almost exactly as we have them, but just dropping a councillor into each space. Wasn't particularly favoured by the community, and it meant that 2 of our wards dropped down to 1 representative, 1 elected member, and we just felt that that wasn't a decision that we wanted to make this round. There wasn't strong support for that, and with the feedback that we'd had around local representatives from local towns, we actually felt having a couple was good there. Small towns, if you've only got 1 elected member and you don't agree with them or get along with them for whatever reason, it makes it easier having a couple of people in there. The subcommittee themselves, when we got to our final decision, really felt like we were making a compromise of what's the best of the options that we've got, considering we've gone so wide. We've considered everything in the mix, and we've whittled it down, and there's no one strong, compelling answer. There's nothing really obvious for us to land on that this is the one that's right. So we put our brains together. There was a bit of a good discussion, strong discussion about which one should we go with, and we chose the option that ended up being put before council, which was to keep the 4 wards rather than and shrink the area around Rolleston down, rather than create another massive ward and keep the situation around Rolleston slightly bigger. So I'll just highlight what that big change is, because on this map, this shows what the final option was. The yellow area, Rolleston, we shrunk down and made really just around the urban Rolleston area. It used to have, or currently has, a number of rural and semi-rural properties that are included, and with those 20,000 people living in that space, we wanted to move that down to actually be, it's an urban ward. and so let's have some urban elected members from there. But that meant that West Melton has dropped and moved out into the Melbourne space. And so we did receive some feedback on that, and it was considered by the full council. Traditionally, in the past, everyone from West Melton has strong links to Darfield. Through high school was the way that the students went in our district, and so it's a very rural area, farming area around it. But more recently now, the students actually travel to Ralston for school. So there's been a change over time, but it felt better if we were going to create a very small Ralston ward. If we're going to leave West Melton outside of that Ralston space, then the decision was, should it head to where it was traditionally linked to Darfield, or should we should it join this other area around Lincoln Taitapu, because that would change things too. So it was a difficult decision around where that should go. And the other change, which is an option 2, was create this massive ward, another massive ward. We've already got one, the Melbourne ward, which has Lincoln Taitapu, but would also include Leaston and Southbridge in it. And again, there's traditional connections here, but it doesn't meet where the community currently is, and no one in the community was asking us to do this. So we felt that was a much bigger change for many towns than for the one town of West Melton and the area around Whedon's. Then went to council and went through the process that I'll get Stephen to talk to. But in the end, I think council felt very similar to the way that the subcommittee had felt. Was we've got a solution, it meets the criteria, it's the least disruptive around communities of interest, but acknowledging that whenever you change a line on a map, some people may feel that change affects them, and it needs to be acknowledged too. But to meet the criteria, this was the best option for us to go to. And the conversation also around the table said, because of our fast change, let's make sure that we do this again in 3 years, not 6 years. And how do we actually stay up and current with the changes that needs to continue to happen? And that was agreed by the committee, by the council, sorry. Albeit that the council will go through elections, and who knows where the council will be in 3 years' time. But that was the direction that we left with people. So yeah, I believe we've been through a real thorough process, considered all the options, and many that were discounted early, but many have stayed in the process right to the end. And as I've said, yeah, there were some difficult decisions to be made. We've listened to all points of view, and that was an important part of the process, making ourselves available to the community and to hear their points of view, as well as those who formally submitted to us. And we determined an option, and that's the decision that's been put in front of us. So I'll see if Malcolm wants to add anything from a political sense around how the process went. Malcolm, you went on the subcommittee, but if you want to add anything, and then we'll throw to Stephen and David.
Yes, thank you, Sam. I think you've summated the system very well. I'd just like to say I've been involved in these many representation reviews over these very wards in the last 20 years, and seen minor changes. But as we are the fastest growing area in the country with the huge population growth we have, I have never seen such change and need for change in representation previously. As Sam has said, we have 23 communities. They all feel as they are their own community. And indeed, there is a lot of parochialism out there still resonating from the 1989 changes, unsurprisingly. I think when you're looking at communities of interests and you have a plus or minus 10% rule, it is very hard to get the balance. And I think there's always going to be some winners and losers in representation. And of course, when we have communities that have had representation from particular councillors over time, they have relationships with them as well. I do believe that option 2 would have created a far bigger set of changes than what the option we have gone for has. I do believe that the communities of interest would have been split far greater if we had gone to option 2. I do support the fact that we need to review in 3 years' time. I think with our growth, that is quite obvious what we are going to have to do. I would just like to point out there had been a great deal of discussion around the options amongst councillors offline, as you say, not at council meetings, but there was a great deal of discussion as we went through the process, and a great deal of dismay at the lack of public turnout to come to listen and talk, and the feedback we got, which was, as you can see, quite minimal when you consider our population of 73,000 people. So I think the decision the council made was a measured one. It may not have taken a long time to make that decision because a lot of people had already had a conversation about that previous to council meetings. So I feel personally myself quite comfortable with the decision we've made, but I would highlight the fact that a 3-year review in 3 years' time would be important. Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Stephen, David?
Kia ora, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Commissioners. I'll just be brief and take you through a few points in relation to the process that we followed, but Sam has really touched on most of it fairly well. I guess just to work through that process and pick up a few key points, as Sam has mentioned, we did undertake some pre-consultation engagement through surveys of our community, and Sam noted some of those key findings that came out, and particularly around the ideas that we explored around what communities of interest meant for our residents, and those ideas that residents identify more with townships rather than wards, that they did place importance on local representation, but also that there wasn't a strong desire for substantial change. People weren't looking for a rapid or major overhaul in the electoral system was the initial feedback that we got. So that was provided a useful framework or a lens, which was helpful for the subcommittee when it went through its process of assessing the various options. After that research, the subcommittee then met a number of times, as Sam has mentioned, in workshop mode and in committee meetings to work through that vast range of options, the scenarios, the maps, and I have to say that I was well supported by staff and by consultants that were doing great analysis work on the mesh blocks and on the numbers, and bringing those through and working through all the adjustments that were being suggested by the subcommittee. But we came to preliminary consultation in June of last year, and that was where those scenarios and options were whittled down to 4, which were taken out for preliminary consultation to the community. And those were, as you've heard, option 1, which is the final, came through as the final proposal. Option 2, which would have seen 3 wards and 10 councillors. Option 3 was 3 wards with 9 councillors. And option 4 was 4 wards with 7 councillors. So there was a range of options there, and that they were what we went out seeking feedback from the community on. As Sam has mentioned, challenging to generate high levels of engagement on this kind of topic, which I'm sure you will have seen in other places as well, a wide range of levels of engagement. So we received overall 106 submissions on that preliminary consultation. What was interesting was that there was only 6% in terms of the preferences between the top 3 of those options. So option 2 was supported by 30% of respondents. Option 1 was supported by 26% and option 4 by 24%. So only 4% between those top 2, only 6% between those top 3. So that suggested there was no clear preference, no overwhelming preference among those who responded to that particular consultation. I guess the subcommittee noted that option 1 did have some elements of compromise around communities of interest in relation to West Melton, but as Malcolm has pointed out, option 2 also presented some potential compromises in the Springs Ellesmere ward. So both of those didn't necessarily present a perfect scenario. We then took the recommendation out to the initial proposal consultation stage in August last year. The council adopted the recommendation of the subcommittee that option 1 would be the initial proposal. So that would see the number of councillors reduced from 11 to 10. Retaining 4 wards, but with West Melton moving from what is currently the Selwyn Central ward to the Melvin ward. And as part of that, the Melvin Community Board would be retained and a new subdivision would be created in the Melvin ward, which would represent the West Melton Township. So the township that was moving from Selwyn Central to Melvin effectively would also become a subdivision within the Melvin ward. So again, we undertook consultation on the initial proposal through September and into early October last year. Once again, we used a wide number of avenues and channels to engage with our community using traditional media, social media, websites, drop-in sessions. We also held a live stream event on Facebook that Mayor Sam hosted. And so there are a number of opportunities for the ratepayers to and residents to engage with that process. Council received and considered the submissions on the initial proposal on 13th of October of last year. A total of 14 submissions were received on the initial proposal, and 3 submitters presented their submissions in person at the hearing. Those 3 submitters represented 4 submissions. One was representing both himself as an individual and West Melton Residents Association. Of those 14 submissions, 5 were in favour of the council's proposal, 9 had objections to various elements of the proposal, and I think those have been outlined in some of the papers that have been submitted to you. I think Sam has gone over most of the key points of the discussion that then ensued around that the hearings and the deliberations on those submissions, noting that there were those elements of compromise, but in order to meet the high growth scenarios that there would it was probably inevitable that there would be some element of compromise there. Council also noted that the proposal to establish the new West Melton subdivision within the Melbourne Community Board area might help to mitigate some of the concerns around representation for that West Melton community. And so that was the initial proposal that was adopted by the council, went through to the council meeting on 27th of October as the final proposal, and was then notified by the council as the final proposal, and with the one appeal that has subsequently been received, which brings us to where we are today. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions on process, but David, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Kia ora, Commissioners. The previous speakers have very clearly articulated the process and the outcomes. So for me, I just want to make some very brief comments to add to what they have said. At our very first meeting, which was in October, in August 2020, we acknowledged that due to the huge growth pockets across our district, the current electoral model wouldn't work for 22 or for 25. So that was really what set us on our pathway. We formed a subcommittee with members from each of our electoral wards and the chair of our community board. We clearly acknowledged the process and time frame and adhered strictly to the Local Government Commission guidelines. The subcommittee itself worked for over a 12-month period, so this was something that we invested a lot of time in. And I guess one of the key things about Selwyn is the huge and very fast growth rates that have occurred for a period of time in pockets around our district. And when we considered that, we talked about the communities of interest and factored in the significant population increase in those years, where in a lot of cases, new people have come into the district without any historic ties to Selwyn. And when I arrived here in the year 2013, the population was 42,000. It's now, as Sam said, 73,000. Interestingly, there's been a significant change in demographic over that period of time. So when the population was 42,000, the average age was 37. Interestingly, as the population's gone up, the demographic age has come down from 37 down to 35. Obviously, there's been significant changes in land use across our district in that time, technology changes, and just the way that we do our business. And we also reminded ourselves and the community of our district-wide philosophy, where in recent years we've introduced very successfully district-wide rates for water, for wastewater, community facilities, and other things where they didn't exist before. Stephen and Malcolm and Sam have talked about the process. I won't dwell on that, but I just want to talk about some of the outcomes. Questions were asked about communities of interest between West Melton and the Melbourne ward under option 1. I guess, as has been articulated under option 2, those communities of interest are even further separated than under option 1. And we have communities in the in the northeast of Taitap, Lincoln and Prebbleton, who are quite separate from those in the southeast of Southbridge and Leaston, geographically further apart, but also different economies and different areas of land use. I think for me, one of the key things about option one is that we have added a political voice to West Melton, a town of 2,500, where it doesn't have one at the moment. It is a fast growing community. We have added that through 2 seats to the Melbourne Community Board. Our final proposals propose a reduced number of elected members from 11 to 10. Interestingly, that was not opposed around the council table by those sitting there, and workload was not considered a factor. And equally, there was no objection to the proposed option one, either by the Melbourne Community Board or the West Melton Residents Association. So, Mr. Chair, that's the comments I would like to make, and we're happy to take questions from commissioners.
And just to close our submission, I'll get the others to keep their microphones on mute so they can sing along with me. We have a council waiata, which says the Waimakariri River to the north, the Rakai River to the south, Te Waihora spreads out here. Who will care for this place? I will, you will, we all will together. Ko Waimakariri ki te raki e, ko Orakaya ki te toku e, te Waihora e hora ake nei, kina te oraka ona iwi e, ma waira e turima e, maho mahaku matato e. Kia ora, thank you for our submission.
Understand. So commissioners, we'll just check in if there's any specific questions before we move to the appellant. We're just right on time, so I'm quite happy to take some questions now. So just looking at the commissioners. Commissioner Piper.
Thanks, Chair. You decided early on that you would reduce the number of councillors from 11 to 10. What were the thoughts about that decision? Why, basically?
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Piper. It wasn't to reduce it to 11 to 10 as an answer. It was to say, let's think about less councillors rather than more councillors, and think about how good decision making happens. How many times around the council table of 12 of us, once we've heard 4 or 5 voices, everyone else starts to say, what they said across the table, what the person before me just said, rather than new ideas and new things coming into the conversation. The speed of decision making came up to it as well, and yeah, those things were probably the key points. Stephen may have some others to add there, but it wasn't saying 11 to 10. It could have been 9, 8, 7, 6. Sure. It was just saying, let's think about less.
But just before you go to something else, did I hear you correctly? Did you say that that would help bring new ideas to the table?
Well, we also thought that remuneration is currently connected. Part of the discussion was remuneration being connected at a pool setting to the number of councillors you have, and that limits the people that are able to put their hand up. If you have more people on council, everyone gets paid less. That means those that can't afford to stand for council don't, and limits people putting their name forward to those that either have money in the bank and can afford to do it, or enough time on their hands to make it happen, or a forgiving spouse or partner that's able to support that decision to go forward. So we felt there could be a wider range of views around the council table if there was a wider range of people putting their hand up for elections based on remuneration.
So I want to be very clear about what you've just said. I would summarise it, and please push back if I'm wrong. You can call me Sue, by the way. I answered a little else. I answered a Piper, but remuneration. So I'll summarise paraphrase what you said. And an issue for the council was that fewer councils might mean that the remuneration might increase, which might bring on a wider range of councillors.
Yes.
Okay. During the process, where as you looked at community, I mean, I'm acutely aware that the submitter has made quite one of the nuisances about this pandemic that we're in the middle of is that we can't do site visits. So you're going to have to help me, or the council's going to have to help me understand the particulars of, in particular, what the Alexanders have raised, where they've raised some quite precise issues about where they see communities are split. And it maybe you do it in the right reply, because none of you have kind of addressed some of that detail. But to help me understand, where are the supermarkets in the Rohi?
There's supermarkets in Ralston. There's supermarkets.
Sorry, I don't write that fast. Ralston, yep.
Ralston, West Melton,
Yeah.
Prebleton, Lincoln.
Hang on. I've only just started writing Prebleton.
Sorry.
Lincoln, yeah. Lincoln, yeah.
Leaston.
Leaston.
Yep.
Darfield.
Very Scottish for an English county, yeah. And
Darfield.
Yeah, and then have you got any idea how many people would go into the city, into Christchurch to buy groceries rather than?
Yeah, more heaps. I don't have the data on that right in front of me, but more and more people are coming to Ralston now because that's where a countdown is. But there's a new world in Ralston and in Lincoln.
Okay.
But if you want to go to a pack and save, at the moment, you have to travel to Christchurch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. And what about high schools?
There are 4 secondary schools, one in Lincoln, one in Leaston.
Oh, Leaston, I wrote that down as Leithfield. Yeah,
Leaston, and one in Darfield.
Yeah.
And the newest one is in Ralston.
Yeah. And netball clubs?
They're just changing the way they're playing netball these days because they're moving everything to Ralston because we've built a 8-court indoor sports facility.
Oh, well done.
And so the Lincoln netball and Darfield netball. And Malcolm, you might know, does Leaston connect in with Lincoln or is Leaston run its own competition?
I'm not 100% sure on that. It's all to do with the metro competition, remembering that we're on the edge of Christchurch City, and a lot of people who've come out to live in our communities still work.
No, I just the problem is as soon as we go on from there, we're or somebody's already made the comment that that people get very attached to their communities, but of course all kinds of arrangements and connections change because of technology and blah blah blah. What about football? What about soccer clubs?
Selwyn United runs one single football club for the whole district out of Ralston.
Cool.
And there were 5 or 6 clubs that all merged 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. Good. No. That gives me a bit of a picture because, of course, if we were driving around, we see all these things. It's pretty funny.
There is rugby's probably the.
Well, I was avoiding rugby. You may have noticed because what I find is that lots of men understand perfectly the rugby arrangements in there, Rohi, but they don't seem to understand football, the beautiful game, nor netball. Now I'm going to change the subject. You'll be pleased to hear, Mr. Chair.
So while you're thinking, can I just get a point of clarity? You asked the Mayor the question about the reduction in the number of council laws and the reasoning behind it. So Mayor Sam, can I just get you to clarify, an enormous amount of your commentary has been about growth and significant increase in population. Can you help us to understand the logic behind wanting to reduce the number of representatives based on the significant increase in the number of representatives that need to be represented? So we need to hear the counter argument. What's the, not just to put a few more dollars in the pocket, so to speak, but can you give us a bit more of a sense of the science behind the justification to reduce the numbers against a growing population and potentially significantly increasing?
Yep. So there was analysis done to look at how many people each of our councillors represented compared to our neighbours and compared to other councils around the country. And we still represent far fewer people than many other councils in New Zealand. So 11 or 12, including the Mayor, 12 elected representatives for 70,000 people, that ratio is not particularly low. So as we continue to grow, there's plenty of capacity for our elected members to continue to represent a greater population.
Can I just push you a little harder? Comparing yourself to other local authorities, that's okay at one level, but there's geographical implications. You know, there's a plethora of variations, isn't there? So can you assure me that you are comfortable that this community is not being disadvantaged by a reduction in the number of elected representatives in a growing population?
Yeah, we only got to look across our border and see that Christchurch population of 350,000 has got 16 elected representatives, so only 5 more for 50% more elected members for 4 or 5 times the population. So I don't think that you can correlate our decision around thinking less councillors resulting in any worse representation or decision making from a council.
Okay, and just while I've got the floor, can you just give me again the sense, why are you suggesting a review in 3 years' time?
The way that growth is affecting us and the uncertainty that there is around the current private plan changes and the decision to have a smaller Rolleston urban ward, we don't want to cut that community of interest in half or have extra lines in 3 or 6 years' time as the town grows. So we need to be flexible to allow new urban areas within our existing townships to fit with their nearest town, rather than just because you cross the road in the middle of a major town, you're now in a completely different ward. We don't want to go down that road. So we thought it was worth reviewing in 3 years to avoid that situation.
Thank you. Commissioner Piper, are you done?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
But just one last thing on that ward thing. If I'm one of the councillors for Melbourne, how long does it take me to drive from the western part of the? I think that'd be the longest, wouldn't it? West to east. What's the travel time?
About an hour and a half.
Okay, so if you lived on the extreme, it'd take you 3 hours to get 3 hours to get to. Sorry, and a 3 hour return trip to council.
Yes.
Okay, I have got some others, but Janie might want to have a think.
I've got some questions, Sue, but I'm happy for you to keep going.
You go, Commissioner Anita.
Thank you. Mayor Sam, when you were setting up your subcommittee, did you think about having anyone independent on it?
No, I don't know that was a consideration. Not to my memory, no.
If not, why not?
We felt that we were able to make a good decision with those that sat around the table. We went with the variety of ward representatives so that we understood where each of the current wards were sitting, rather than just having 4 or 5 people who wanted to put their hand up for the job. So we wanted the variety of views brought in that way, and felt that the community board members sitting there as well allowed that to happen. It's something that now that you're raising it, I'm thinking, yeah, why didn't we do that? And in 3 years' time, I think that'll be certainly raised around our table. We've got independent members of our Audit and Risk Committee, and it definitely adds value having the independent members present. So, yep, I'm definitely open to that in the future.
Thank you.
Go back to Commissioner Piper.
What are the characteristics of West Melbourne that make it appropriate to place that settlement? Is it a settlement? Am I being rude to it if I say settlement? But what makes suitable to be in the same ward as other communities in the ward?
There's West Melbourne's a town, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people, and there's historical connections to the towns that are around it. So Whedon's will move into the same ward that West Melton is moving into, and there's close connections between Whedon's and West Melton. As you move towards the west, Halkett is connected to West Melton as well. So there's a group of towns and smaller communities that sit around West Melton that are connected to that town as well. As I mentioned earlier, historically the ties are to Darfield, and there's a big rural area around. Once you leave the township of West Melton, it's all farmland. It's not an urban setting outside the borders of the town, with strong rural ties. But in the last 5 years, that has begun to change, and the connections through to Rolleston, and particularly for secondary school, that is now the route that families are taking. I guess for West Melton's only on one side of Rolleston. I think those that are on the other side of Rolleston also feel that same level of connection to our largest town, Rolleston. They still come here for their groceries, they come here for their shopping, they come here for their dinners, but we've got them in a separate ward currently, so that's around Lincoln, Springston. There's historic reasons for that, but actually a lot of their day-to-day activities will still be coming to Rolleston for things. So we're not making a decision for West Melton that's treating any other town that's an equal distance from Rolleston any differently. Sorry, you're on mute, Sue.
Sue, you're on mute.
So how's Weasden similar to, say, Springfield?
Well,
Home of the donut.
Springfield's a lot further away. They're both on a state highway, which is the main connection through to Christchurch, I suppose. Springfield's a whole lot smaller. Springfield would be 200 or 300 people as opposed to 2,000 or 3,000.
Okay. And how does the rural area of Melbourne differ from the Ellesmere ward?
Great question, Sue. Great question.
Thank you, EJ.
That decision is more about 1989 boundaries and strong rural communities feeling ties to the way things have been, rather than any large difference in farming rural practice. And I think that might be Janie's question, thinking about the independence that gets brought in. For an outsider looking at the difference between Springfield, as you say, and Southbridge, they're both small towns in a rural setting, and a lot of values would be held the same in those communities. But because, for historic reasons, they were completely different councils prior to 1989, Ellesmere Council and Melbourne County Council, those differences have remained, and representation from each of those places, our communities continues to tell us we want to keep that separate.
That perhaps is the parochialism that I mentioned earlier on, and also West Melton has had more of a rural focus, along with Kirwee, just its near neighbour, and the newer residents there. A lot of those are commuter belt people who transport to the city for work.
Yeah, look, even in Wellington, we understand how important the arrangements pre-1989 were, you know. But fortunately, they've dissipated.
Commissioner, we just...
Yeah, I know that, but look, hang on, I've got 2 more questions. There's some really interesting stuff in here, which is being very helpful.
2 more.
Well, why did the council decide, when you're considering the final proposal, not to increase the size of the Rolleston ward? Because if I got it right, some of the current urban part of Rolleston is actually in adjoining wards, is it?
No, all of the urban part of Rolleston is in the proposed new Selwyn ward.
Okay.
Sorry, new Rolleston ward. There's
the current urban.
Yeah. The current urban.
Yeah, well, that probably
there
answers
is a
the
proposal around the private plan changes. So there may be some future urban areas, and that's why we might need to review in 3 years' time.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, Burnham military camps in the district, isn't it? And is it a sort of a township of its own, and how does it relate with the other parts of the Rohi?
Sorry, can you just repeat that first part of that question?
Sorry. How does Burnham military camp relate? I mean, is it very large, and how does it relate with the other settlements in the other part of the Rohi?
Burnham grows and shrinks depending on whether people are on deployment or how many people are here or whether they're at home. They have been the town that we have moved around the wards the most, as those that are here are often here on very short-term training bases, rather than feeling like a real sense of ownership of the community. So I think in the last 3 representation reviews we've done, they've moved from Melbourne to Ellesmere, and between the two, depending on trying to meet the plus or minus 10% rule.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mayor Sam. That's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Piper. Commissioner Anea?
Just following up on one of Sue's questions and your answer, Mayor Sam, you said that, you know, that basically the Ralston area kept everything that was in that urban area, but in your officer's report, they actually recommended that I'm just looking at the notes here, sorry, while I'm looking down, the area around the West Ralston School should be included. What was your thinking about why you decided not to do that?
The only thing in that block is the West Rolleston School. If you're to drive there now, it's a school sitting with a farm and irrigators sitting around it. There's no one living in that block, and it's a matter that's currently being looked through as a private plan change through our district plan review as well. So we haven't excluded the possibility that that would change in the future, but if we're looking at the current urban boundary of Ralston, if you were to drive past there or look, it's certainly not an urban area other than a school which sits there and is visited. So the people affected actually live within the urban space and will be part of the future Ralston ward.
So it seems to me that in the very near future, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that that area will be part of Rolleston in the very near future, I would have thought. And I know you've got a plan change going on, et cetera, but I guess what I'm kind of seeing is that you've made your decisions for now, realizing that they're not going to last very long. Can you help me understand why that's a good way of thinking? Wouldn't it be better to, in fact, understanding your population of your area, knowing as you do, as we all do as councils, where the areas are likely to grow because you understand about the infrastructure, you understand about the land. Why wouldn't you, in fact, this time round, have come up with a plan that would last you for 6 years, for example?
So we've done that for all the areas that were inside the infrastructure boundaries that have been identified. This area sits outside of that, is adjacent to our wastewater treatment plant and is adjacent to the resource recovery park. And so there's a few sensitivities around whether this is the right place for our housing to go. Every area that was subject to a private plan change that sat within previously identified infrastructure boundaries, although they may look like farms, we've said that's where growth should go. They have been included, but with the changes to legislation through the last 12 months, we've got no control over knowing where things may or may not pop up. And I guess we also didn't want to be a council that's saying, yes, this will be part of the future urban space of Selwyn, but actually there's a whole process to go through and it might not be approved. And it was getting the cart before the horse if we were to try and make that decision ahead of the private plan change.
Thank you, Mayor Sam. That was a very good answer in response.
Okay.
I've got one last very quick question.
One last one, thank you. Yeah.
You said, Mayor Sam, that the council was clear that, quote, it did not want single elected member wards. What was the rationale for that?
So that ended up being one of the options, option 4, that went out to the community. And the feedback that we got, that wasn't a supported option that came back to the community, didn't want it either. And the discussion for us also focused on whether or not one elected member was able to represent a ward, and Melbourne was going to be that ward that would only have one elected member, and that's the ward that's 1.5 hours one side to the other. It was the ward that I used to represent when I was a councillor. It's a very large ward with many small townships, and would be very difficult for one councillor if you were to have still a ward system to be served that area.
Okay, I think we've given that a pretty good go, and out of respect to the appellant who we had booked for 9:40, we really should proceed and hear from Mark. I know that he's been, or you have been on screen, online observing, so you're familiar with what's happened so far. So Penny, you'll do whatever it is you need to do to perform.
Yep, just bringing Mark in now. He should pop up any moment.
And Commissioners, page 43 of the paper. Kia ora, Mark.
Morena.
Morena, welcome. You've obviously been observing so far, so you've got a good handle on what the discussion has been. So we're looking forward to your summary of observations based on what you've presented so far.
Thank you. And when I come to the end of my summary of my submission, Council and the Mayor in particular just actually made some errors in fact. So I will address those at the end of my...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
We just need to get the volume up somewhere if we can.
My microphone tested okay in the testing. Can you hear me now?
That's getting better.
I'll speak louder and louder, and that might make it better. I'll shout at you as much as I was reluctant to do so. You've had my submission and my appeal, so I'll just summarise it a little. My wife and I have lived in this area for 27 years. For that whole 27 years, Ralston has been our community of interest. It's been the town which we have seen grow. It's been the town in which I have been involved. I've been a member of the Ralston Residents Association for that whole 27 years and held a number of offices in that association. Council's proposal puts us in the Ellesmere ward. We have no community of interest with Ellesmere. My wife, as seen in the submission, said if she hadn't had business reasons to go to Leaston, she would never have gone to Leaston. It's not our community of interest. I hope you take time to review the council's live stream of the hearing. It was very disappointing. It was rushed. It was perfunctory. My submission did not get considered. The CEO read a submission, his summary of the points in the submissions, and then they listened to those who presented. Those who did not present did not get their submissions heard by council. The council addressed none of the points in my submission at the hearing. I could not believe it. When it came to the council's adoption of the model, they did miss the most egregious year, and I'll address it now. The mayor has just said there are no residential houses on the west side of Duns Crossing Road. He's wrong. There are a number of residential houses of the Ralston Township in the Ralston living zone on the west side of Duns Crossing Road, as well as West Ralston School. Those people, if this model is as council adopted, is left, will be in the Ellesmere ward. They are part of the Ralston Township, but they'll be in the Ellesmere ward, which looks to Leaston. That's absurd, absolutely absurd. As a bare minimum, I ask you to adopt Mr. Hill's recommendation that one mesh block is added to the Ralston ward, which will put these people in the Ralston Township. The mayor was also wrong when he said that West Melton and Whedons are in the same ward. They are not. Whedons, the community of Whedons, which identifies with a school and a reserve, is split between the Springs and Ralston wards. The school is in the Ralston ward. The reserve goes to the Springs ward. They are not in the Malvern ward with West Melton. The mayor was again wrong in his statement. What else have I got? Excuse me, I'll just check my notes. The formation of a very small, very urban Ralston ward will not help Selwyn. To date, if you look at the models of Selwyn, all wards have a mixture of urban and rural areas. This, I believe, has made the role of a Selwyn councillor better because they have to consider urban and rural areas. An urban Ralston ward will find that the three other wards will gang up on them. It'll be, as if you live in Selwyn, you often hear, why does Ralston get blah, 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 blah. With an urban Ralston ward and no rural areas, the perception will be an urban versus the rural. This will not help Selwyn. It will further divide Selwyn. In the model that we prefer, option 2, I refute the comments that it divides the community interests of Springs and Ellesmere wards. These, prior to 1989, this was one council. They historically are not split. They're in option 2, none of the communities are split between two wards. For most of the people in Ellesmere and Springs wards, there will be no difference. They will look to the same councillors, they will look to the same townships. They're not being split. In option 2, I will be a member of the Selwyn Central Ward. I will continue to look to the township that I have looked to for my wife and I and my family have looked to for 27 years. West Melton. I'm pleased you discussed West Melton. Historically, it was part of the Melbourne Ward and did have strong links to Melbourne. That's when the township had 60 houses. 60. It now has over 600. Those new residents send their children to Ralston College, not Darfield High. They shop when they shop in Selwyn, in Ralston. There's a small supermarket in West Melton, but the bulk of their shopping is done in Ralston. They come to the Selwyn Aquatic Centre. Te Ara Atea, our new library, is their library. They come to the Selwyn Sports Centre, again in Ralston. Their children play sport if they play football in Ralston. If they play netball, they train at West Melton, but they play in Ralston. They will be playing in Ralston. They don't go to Darfield. They don't. So like myself, the West Melton residents are being associated with a township that they do not have a community of interest in. Whedon's Cricket Club is the strongest cricket club, junior cricket club in the whole of the Canterbury country area. They associate with Whedon's Domain and Ralston. The bulk of their growth comes from Ralston, and yet they're being put in the Springs Ward. It's just beggars belief. I was surprised that the option 1 came out as the strongest option, because as you saw with what the council quoted, it wasn't actually supported by the majority of residents. It had more support. It had option 2 had more support than option 1. So I commend to you my submission and my appeal. I trust that you have read it and that you've seen the points I have raised. I think option 2 is a better model going forward. It doesn't divide as many communities. The people of Taitapu aren't being divided. The people of Lincoln aren't being divided. The people of Springston are actually being divided. If you look at Springston, the rural area of Springston is shifted into the Ellesmere Ward. The Springston Township only just remains in the Springs Ward where they have looked to traditionally. Yes, the people of Springston shop at Ralston, but they still associate strongly with Lincoln. So I think the council has got it wrong, and I found myself in a very invidious position having to do this appeal. It wasn't easy to decide to appeal council's decision. It was not easy, but I think the council has got it so wrong that I think that it is in your hands to correct, firstly, the most egregious area. West Ralston School and the residents on the west side of Duns Crossing Road belong in the Ralston Ward. But more importantly, choose option 2, the model that council did not choose. It is the better model. It has less disruption. Look, you've commented, Councillor Piper asked about this. Somebody asked about the size of the proposed Melbourne Ward. Geographically, it's huge, and yet it gets no more representatives than it currently does. It currently has 2 councillors and a community board of 5 members. It increases in size and population and has 2 councillors and 5 community board members. It's absurd. The Ralston Ward, which is essentially the urban area of Ralston plus the industrial area, has 3 councillors. They will have 1 community committee in that ward for 3 councillors. That ratio is by the highest of any in the proposed model. The Ralston Ward councillors will have virtually nothing to do because they will have 1 community committee. They'll have 1 evening meeting per month. The other wards will have many more community committees and community groups to go to. It's just, this council's model makes the numbers work. It does not make the community of interest work, and it will not make for an effective council for the next 3 or 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think in the right of reply, we need the obvious points of clarity against the observations that Mark has made in terms of who's right here. So need to know. So in the writer reply, I'm sure that EJ's got those points noted, and we'll get those points of clarity, please. So that's an important point just to kick off. I'll go to Commissioner Anea.
Good morning, Mark.
Morena.
Nice to see you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. I've just got one question for you. If the council has got it so wrong, why aren't more of the communities upset about it?
Because it's hard to get them engaged. You know, in these COVID times, people are struggling to maintain their jobs and their families. And representation rule has never been a sexy topic. I mean, this is the third that I've been involved in, fourth, I think, in Selwyn, in my time as in Selwyn. And they've never encountered a huge engagement. As I say, I believe that I represent my neighbours and myself who don't look to other parts of Selwyn except Ralston. But, you know, I can't answer that. Getting community engaged, I'm sure you know from your own experiences, can be really difficult at times. If it's not a sexy issue, it doesn't hit them in the back pocket, they really don't care.
So do you think they really do care passionately about their communities of interest, or are they just lines on a map and they'll just continue to do what they do and it's not really going to affect them much? And because your community's changed in nature with the big population increase and lifestyle blocks everywhere?
Well, the population increase hasn't been lifestyle block. It's been the urban growth at West Melton, Ralston, Lincoln and Prebbleton predominantly. Other townships have grown, but it hasn't been a growth in lifestyle blocks. There have been very few lifestyle blocks. In fact, we're seeing zoning requests to turn lifestyle blocks into residential areas. So, but they may not, but it's hard to express. You know, the Ralston Resident Association, which I've been a member of for 27 years, represents my area. And now that's going to be split over 2 wards, which just seems silly. The Selwyn Central Ward councillors who represent West Melton, that was another point I was going to make. The Mayor said West Melton would get better representation. In fact, at the moment, they've got 4 councillors. Under the new model, they get 2 councillors and a community board. So is that better? I don't think so. It's just simply hard to engage. It's those who want to engage, those who will go to, it's a question, I guess, take it back to the question of the mayor said we wanted local representation. People wanted to go to local people they know. If I'm electing an Ellesmere councillor, they're not local. They don't know the issues in my area, the roading, the and other issues in my area. They're based over 30 kilometres away. The Selwyn Central Ward councillors are based less than 6. And so it's that local representation is not effective that way. If Springs and Ellesmere wards are merged, there is no change in the local representation. You have 4 councillors across that ward. Given the current voting patterns, you would expect 2 or 3 voted from Ellesmere and 1 or 2 from the current Springs ward. They will still have that geographical representation.
Just while I can, in terms of the right of reply, Mark, you made the observation that your submissions, that at the council meeting where the decision was made, your submissions weren't spoken to or weren't to that effect. What I want to just get absolute clarity on it, and it's probably via the CEO, I suspect, did the submissions get presented to the council laws in the order paper? And that's and okay, right, thank you. I've got the answer there. Okay. So they were available for because it's an important part of the democratic process to be sure that the elected members got to see those submissions. So you're confirming they were in the order paper.
If the submissions weren't discussed, it's hard as a submitter to know whether they were actually considered.
Yeah, okay, but just one.
The point I'm making is that from the outside looking in, and the Deputy Mayor actually confirmed it, that the councillors had pre-discussed these prior to the hearing, and some of them had made their mind up prior to the hearing. So that speaks to a very poor process.
Okay.
The points in the submissions weren't individually considered publicly. There's no assurance for me as a submitter that the points I made were considered by any councillor because nobody commented on them.
Okay.
So the process appears to be very poor. That's why I recommend you go and have a look at the live stream. It was a very quick hearing, surprisingly quick. And those who didn't present, and it wasn't just my submission, those who didn't present in person didn't have the points in their submissions considered.
Okay. Commissioner Piper.
Thank you, Chair. Your submission says, look, 10 councillors is the correct number, 10 elected members plus the mayor. Did you examine that statement with regard to your concerns about effective representation?
I don't think increasing number of councillors is the issue. The workload of Selwyn's councillors isn't dramatic in terms of you could have, I built Selwyn could work with 7 councillors. The workload is not huge. The council laws spend between 3 and 1 day a week.
Malcolm, you need to, you're fading away, mate.
Sorry, I'll speak up. Councillors in Selwyn spend on average between 1 and 3 days a week on council work, depending on their personal situation. And increasing the number of councillors wouldn't change that much and wouldn't give more effective representation. Councillors are very available to the members. My problem is the geography. While
well, hang on. Just remember that we have to balance fair representation with effective representation. And you've discussed effective representation at some length. But fair representation, the number of councillors may well affect the effective representation in terms of how boundaries are drawn. Have you considered that matter?
Yes.
And your conclusion was?
10 will give 10 plus the mayor plus the community board would give effective and fair representation. My problem is where the ward boundaries are drawn. You have 3 councillors in a very geographically small ward, high in population but small in area, and 2 councillors in a very geographically spread ward with much fewer people. It's harder to get around 10 communities over an hour and a half's drive than one community which you drive to and can walk or cycle or scoot round while you're there. So effective is will be much more difficult for the Ellesmere and Malvern councillors unless, and there's no guarantee, the other ward councillors step across the boundaries and help.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
So both commissioners are comfortable. I'm comfortable with what's been presented so far. I am pretty keen though on the right of reply to get those points of clarity. And EJ, I've noted some of them, but you've got them. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get them forward through. So those are the points around. We haven't got them all down, but the Rollistons, the school, the mesh block of the school, and one of these houses side by side. Yeah, I think I'll talk offline to EJ after, just make sure we've got everything there. Right. I think that the timing is appropriate for a break. You'll see against our schedule we've so Mayor Sam, as you do a comparison for other local authorities around New Zealand about representation and all those sorts of numbers, you can do a comparison around the performance of the commission when we have these hearings. And I can tell you, you're on a par with everybody else. We're all gone over time, so you're not out of whack with the rest of us. So just bear with. So what's the time now? 10:20. You need half an hour, guys? Yep. So why don't we reconvene at 10:45? It's time for a break. So Penny, is that all? okay with you?
Do you mean 11?
What's the time now?
10:23?
It's 10:20. We need about half an hour.
Okay, your clock's slightly different to mine. That's fine. Paul, you carry on.
25 minutes is enough. Is that enough? Or do you want longer?
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, we'll come back, Mr. Chair. It's 10:24 on our times now. So if we allow ourselves 25 minutes, we'll be back at 10:50. Is that okay?
10:50. Okay. 10:50. All right. So Penny, just detail what happens from here.
Sure, thank you. So we just leave our live stream running. So if everyone can make sure that they stay on mute and turn their videos off, that would be ideal. If anyone wants to leave the meeting, you're welcome to do that. To come back in, you just do it the same way you did at the beginning. And I think that's about it from me. I just pop a slide up to let anyone who's watching our live stream know that we're taking a break.
And commissioners will ring in on the other number. Just quickly. Yeah.
Hi, Brendan, just to let you know that we can see you now.
The wonders of technology. Sorry for being late, I couldn't turn it on from this end for some reason.
All right, I've temporarily lost Sam, so I'll just go and see where he's got to.
Oh, no, that might be me. I think I can just, he's here. I just need to bring him back in. My apologies for that.
Thank you.
I think we've got
We've got everybody?
Yeah, we're all present, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right, so we'll reconvene, and thanks for the break. That was useful for everybody. So Mayor Sam, the opportunity now is for you and your team to undertake your right of reply. And through that break, I think you'll find that EJ has managed to fire off a few points that we're looking for. So it's pretty obvious we need real clarity on those points raised. So we're in your hands for your right of reply.
Great, thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll try and share my screen with you so that I can show you a map of the areas that we're talking about and you can understand the context for the community. So the first question I'll consider is the area around West Rolleston School. Can everyone see this map? Is that showing up on your screen?
Yep.
Great. So this is Rolleston residential area. It map's a little bit old as this is all now in houses as well. And across the road is Rolleston industrial zone and future, well, currently zoned industrial zone. And our mesh block comes out to Whedon's Ross Road here. So if you're looking on the map of the proposal, it covers all of the industrial area of Rolleston and all of this proposed and currently within the infrastructure boundaries, Rolleston area. The West Rolleston School is this little box that's here, which I'll zoom into so you can see. It sits on the opposite side of the road to the current town. And you don't get me started on all of the traffic management issues of getting kids to and from school across the road. Anyway, that's where the ministry has built it. And the State Highway 1 is here. As you can see, the surrounding farmland around the school is farmland. That is as it currently sits, and there is a private plan change across this land. The mesh block, though, does include these houses down here. And so there's 80 properties in total, and the mesh block comes all the way down here. 80 properties in total. A lot of that is farmland, as you can see. And this is our Pines wastewater treatment plant, all of this land. And our resource recovery park is also here. Hence why it's not so simple as to just say, yes, future growth is going to happen in this space, because there's all sorts of agreements and partnerships with Christchurch City, Waimakariri, Ekan, Ngāi Tahu around the future urban growth in the greater Christchurch area. So hopefully that provides some context around where it sits. There are no houses around Rolleston, but I do accept that there are some homes in this more rural setting across the road, which would form part of that mesh block if it were changed. Do you want to ask anything else clarifying on that matter before I move to Whedon's?
Well, I think what you've done, Sarah, I mean, in your submission, you said that the school was like that. You painted the picture of being in a paddock in the middle of nowhere. You've now acknowledged that actually it's quite close to quite a lot of houses by the look of it. It's an old map.
Opposite.
What age is this map?
Oh, this is just Google Maps. This is live Google Maps.
Say?
This is just Google Maps today.
Oh, I thought you said it was an old map when you were presenting this.
Oh, well, no, Google obviously hasn't updated to today. I don't know what date the last Google flyover was, but there are more houses have been built in this area of Rolleston down here than what is currently shown. You can see this is actually all in houses now. and it's
Yes,
slowly not being.
sorry, so just for purity, because it's in a public setting. So this is a map on Google of an unknown date.
Yep.
So give us a sense. Is it 5 years old, 2 years old, 10 years old? What do you think it might be?
You'll need to consult Google to know the exact date. I'm just trying to use a map that provides some context to show you what the current situation is. These.
Well,
Right.
what are the squares over the road presumably to the north?
Sorry, I'll go back to, what are you asking me?
I'm just chasing up on Brendan's thing. You might like to get a colleague. There'll be a date on the map somewhere, but you see to the right of your arrow, there's a whole lot of rectangular areas. What's all that?
These are all houses. I can zoom in further for you. These are all houses.
In there?
Yep.
Okay. So that's, yeah.
So they're over the road.
Maybe you could get a colleague to tell us what year that was.
I'd say it's older than 18 months because there are other houses that are being built in the other parts of Rolleston that aren't showing on this map. But it's not 5 years because most of these houses are only about that old. The school is less than 5 years old.
Sam, I suppose you can get a sense, I mean, from the Commissioner's perspective, we're just trying to understand what the appellant's commentary is. And the appellant made the comment that what the Mayor had said was not correct. And so you've now brought this map up to give us a sense, and you've acknowledged that maybe what you articulated earlier on wasn't quite as accurate as maybe you might have wanted it to be.
I would say that in the mesh block that we're considering, which is this mesh block that runs out here and includes the school, around the school there are no houses. In the mesh block there are 1 or 2 houses that will be outside of Rolleston Urban because they sit outside Rolleston Urban. They're not currently on zoned residential land, and the only way that will change is through private plan change out of the control of council.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to be persistent about this. Those houses that are adjacent to the school, where would children in those houses go to school?
To the
primary school.
To the school.
To the West Rolleston Primary School.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
Okay, I'll move on to Whedon's.
Okay.
So Whedon's school sits here. As you can see, the area around Whedon's, I'll just zoom out so you can appreciate. There's a lot of horse training that happens in our district in this area, and you can see that here. It's a predominantly rural area. The school, again, is one of these spaces where the school sits on one side of the road, where my arrow is. And actually the catchment for the school and where everyone else lives is gathered from a much larger area. There's not many students that walk to this school. So yes, the school is on one side of the proposed space, but I don't consider that being the community of interest being cut off from one another because there's no one, well, I don't know how many people that sit at the school and live there to vote. So the community's actually been held together, although the school will be part of the Rolleston urban ward. Does that give clarity?
Well, sorry, Chair, but if I was in the room, I'd be asking you why you would split a community of interest between a settlement and its school. And I'd be asking you what was the criteria you used for community of interest. But I'm not going to, because the Chair will rightly say we've probably got enough information.
And there is no settlement. There's just a rural school and kids travel from all over the place to come to the school. There's no settlement in Whedon's.
Well, I'm glad I was wrong, because then I can ask a question and make sure I'm properly informed. The boundary goes where on your map?
Runs down Whedon's Road.
Whedon's Road. Okay. Lovely. And yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll listen on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's been moved into the Springs ward, which is the area, and I'll just zoom out, which is the same as all of this area here. Again, very rural. closest township is Prebleton, which sits here. So all of this is going to be part of the Springs ward, an existing ward. And the reason why this part of Whedon's, I was just talking with Stephen, he might be able to provide some more clarity on this, was really to do with the numbers and making the numbers work, and not seeing that actually it was splitting or making a community just moved away from its place of interest. I mean, the other option was that it heads to Melbourne, and that would have just been extending the Melbourne ward even further. Does that answer the Whedon's stuff, Brendan?
Point of clarity, yep, thank you.
The next question you asked was Springs and Ellesmere communities being split or not in option 2. So option 2 has Springs and Ellesmere communities all in the one ward. It's not splitting the communities, it's bringing them, it would be pulling the 2 wards together. And it was actually part of, they weren't initially just one council, they were previously 2 councils pre-1989. One of the roads in that ward is called Boundary Road, and I believe it was named that because that was the boundary between Paparoa and Ellesmere County Council back then. If you want more clarity on that history, the Deputy Mayor was on council not long after that, and may be able to provide that to you.
Yeah, what I can add is that at amalgamation in 1989, Paparoa County did stretch out through nearly up to Lincoln itself. The Springs ward has a boundary of the Selwyn River now through to Ellesmere, which it has had since 1989. And Springs wards tends to be made up of metro people who are heading towards the city to work, lifestyle blocks, and of course the university. Whereas when we head out into Ellesmere, it is more land production, grain, vegetables, seed, and rural in nature than it is over the river in Springs.
Okay. Thank you.
The next question was around the rural area in Springston being cut off in our option. So Springston is just down here. So this is Rolleston where we started the map. We're now down here in Springston, small town between Lincoln and Rolleston. And the proposal is that Springston Township, so quite close into the boundary, will remain part of the Springs ward connected to Lincoln. But as we zoom out, you'll see that Springston sits in a much more rural context, and the area that's in here will be part of the Ellesmere ward, which again is just a large, mainly rural type space with agricultural uses for farmland. So Springston Township has not been split, but the boundary has been put along the back of Springston is the township we're talking about. Springston Township's not been split, but the rural area around Springston will move to the Ellesmere ward. Hope that provides clarity on that. Next question was, Council has agreed that West Melton has connections to Rolleston community. If this is the case, why has it been moved away from Rolleston? And so I'll just zoom out again to give you some context. So Rolleston is here. Our boundary of our district sits very close to Christchurch, and West Melton is obviously close to Rolleston and close to Christchurch. And our district actually is large geographically and is all the way off the map up to Arthur's Pass. So in the last 5 years, Council has made some major community investments into Rolleston. And they are Te Ara Atia, a cultural centre, performance space and library, a health hub that CDHB has taken the main lease on, and there's a brand new birthing unit that's been put in there, an extension to the aquatic centre with a new 25-metre pool, a sports centre with 8 indoor courts, and those facilities mean that actually the whole district now starts looking to Rolleston. So we're not trying to talk about one community that looks to Rolleston and everyone else looks somewhere else. Actually, all of Selwyn now looks to Rolleston for many of the things that go on within Selwyn. And so West Melton, other than the schooling, which the senior students in West Melton, the senior students from West Melton, their zone is down to Rolleston. Other than that, everyone else has the similar view of connection to Rolleston for their connections within our community. So I don't think we're doing anything different for West Melton than we are for any other town that sits around Ralston. And lastly, it sounded like some of the submission really focused on these boundaries that we're creating actually being walls between communities, and that's not what we're doing at all. Putting a line on a map is not saying you can now no longer go to your local shop because that's where you want to be, or head down the road left instead of turning right. These are for electoral purposes and to try and ensure we've got fair and effective representation with councillor numbers that meet what we think our community desires, and to meet a plus or minus 10% ratio. And taking all of those four matters into account, we believe the option that we've put forward most does justice to those four in the best way possible. So I hope that answers the questions that you had. I'm happy to answer any more. And Stephen, if I've missed anything that you think needs some specifics, happy for you to answer those now.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mayor Sam. No, I think you've covered off most of those points. I do have another map available if there are any other questions around the maps that shows the boundaries of the proposal overlaid over the district. So if there's anything else that you want to go back to clarify, I could share that screen.
Great. And so, Mr. Chair, I should just finally say, I don't think that a township of 20,000 people, to suggest that there's nothing to do for a councillor with 20,000 people in a town, I think is disingenuous. And the way that was portrayed by the submitter, I don't think recognises the true situation. 20,000 people need good, fair and effective representation, and we'll be looking for the councillors that are in that space to provide that. But also acknowledge that our councillors, when you're elected by a particular ward, you're actually, once elected, you're a councillor for our whole district. And there's councillors that take interest and travel and move across the district to represent things that they are interested in, or that they get assigned to, or that they put their hand up for. And so our councillors do move around the district and take interest in things that go beyond the boundaries. And while there will be some things that are nuanced and different for a township of 20,000 that are more of an urban focus, and it might mean that representation looks slightly different because there's not 20 small communities, each with their own little meeting that wants a councillor to be at each one for many nights of a week. There are other pressures and other things that they will get dragged into that are more urban matters that the rural setting and so on doesn't have. So I do think that there's plenty of work, and there will be a lot of focus for those that are elected within the Ralston urban ward, and to suggest otherwise, I don't think really meets the reality of true representation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Sam. No, we won't go into any more questions. The protocol that we follow with everybody is pretty standard. So, but thank you for the opportunity. So let's understand that the process from here is the Commission clearly will go away and do its homework. In the background, officers will be talking to each other. So if more information is required, then EJ will be communicating to gather that for us. You know that we have to have our decisions all made by the 10th of April. We're on a significant work program, as I'm sure you could imagine. So just as we conclude, I want to acknowledge to you, Mayor Sam, and to CEO David, the work that's gone on by you in the background. The last 12 months of engaging with your community as you best see fit to gather the information that's important to you, and representing those really important principles of representation and democracy. And to the admin team that have been working to ensure that there's great cross-pollination of technological knowledge so that we can actually land today, Dave. Thank you for the team in the background. And to my team, the Commission team, thanks for the effort that's gone into getting us on the screen today. So with those passing words, we'll close with our karakia. And then we'll all be able to enjoy the rest of the day as we best see fit. So thanks for the effort, and we'll just close with our karakia. Our karakia is unahia. Unahia, unahia, unahia te uru tapanui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau. Te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatu. Koera o rongo, whakarea aki ki runga. Kia wātia, kia wātia. Hei rā, kia wātia, haue pai Māori.